Many of you will know that Tony was absolutely brilliant at putting models together. You know, a good diagram, and as you can see, usually quite a colourful diagram, he was absolutely brilliant at taking complex ideas and putting them down in such a way that it enabled us to discuss them, to talk about them, and to use them as a useful tool in practice. This is a slide we're using, and many of you here will be very familiar with, those of you who are the trainers on the NQSW programme, and many of you who may have been participants on that programme. This was a slide that he put together in order to help us to think about the number of the things we've been talking about this morning. The link between the purpose and understanding of supervision, being clear about purpose, being able to engage with emotion, the effect that that will have on people's capacity to observe, to work on a day-to-day basis with children and families, it will also, the influence that all that will have on people's capacity to use authority appropriately with families. The worker that goes into a family feeling very uncertain can sometimes react in one of two ways, can either become very authoritarian and perhaps quite perhaps bullying in their work, or may step right back in a bit of the way we saw this morning and not be able to use their power and authority appropriately. And that will affect the quality of assessment. So it's a way of trying to describe and to think about the dynamics of what is happening. Something that has come up time and time again in numerous serious case reviews where people have not been paying attention to some of the complexities of what's happening. We know, and it's actually quite interesting, I think some of you may have seen, there was some reasonably recent research by Forrester and colleagues, which was published in Child Abuse Review in 2008. And Forrester noted in their study how social workers were going into families and using very confrontational and aggressive communication styles. They were looking at what was going on, and that's what they noted. And they have argued in their paper that we've got to pay more attention to those kind of micro skills that people are using with families. And I think that's absolutely right, but I think what we're trying to talk about is that it isn't just a question of looking at micro skills, but it is also very much to do with the way people are supervised. If people are nervous, unsure about their role and scared, that's when they're going to resort to those kind of extremes of either passivity or aggression. So the fact the study noted those aggressive and confrontational styles, I think, is really important. But we need to not just think about the skill development, we need to think about how people are supported in their role in being able to work differently. I should put this up because this was, again, a slide that has been developed and we've used in relation to the work that we've been doing. I shall probably not say much more about it other than it's about how we think about the factors that that are in place that make the difference between supervision that has a good effect on outcomes and supervision that doesn't. I think it's also in Tony's staff supervision in social care book as well. So what we're talking about is the supervisor and what they're bringing to supervision, the supervisee and what they're bringing to supervision, how they adapt to particular supervisors, and needing to think about all the things that will affect that. I think Tony's work around the supervision history, for example, is something that many here will be very, very familiar with. But what we're trying to do there is to help people to think about the history that we bring to that relationship on both sides, actually, and how that is going to affect that. There's all sorts of other things that will be affecting to do with current support systems, current organisation, support for supervision, but there will be a number of things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about that relationship. This was something that we developed when we were doing the work for the early professional development social workers, which followed on from the newly qualified social worker programme. And we were trying to find a way of articulating some of the thinking around authority, how people used authority in supervision, and to think about the ways in which we could help people to think about their style and how that would affect practice. We used some of the work that is in the Calder and Hackett Assessment in Childcare book on parenting styles, which looks at parenting styles as authoritative, authoritarian, permissive or neglectful. And then went on to think about what happens in a supervisory relationship where the supervisor might be either authoritarian, authoritative, etc., etc. Now, what we know is that it's an authoritative style that actually tends to be linked with good outcomes for children. There's been a huge amount of discussion about authoritative supervision recently coming out of the second Baby Peter serious case review. And there was a quote in Community Care from the author of that review saying, "I would summarise the single most important finding in the case of Baby P and in almost every other serious case review I've worked on or studied as being the failure of every protective agency involved, doctors, lawyers, police and social workers, to be authoritative in their dealings with the parents or carers." That's in this week's Community Care. I was really pleased to see that there's a quote from Jenny from Bernardo's, who I think is probably here, I saw her, yeah, who is then quoted as saying, even if we have guidance that's changed, you know, telling us to be more authoritative in our work, actually supervisors need to be properly supported in order to be able to do that. So when we were doing our work on early professional development and supervision, we were thinking about that very fact of, if we want workers to be authoritative in their work with families, we need to think about the style of supervision, and we need authoritative supervisors. We need to get that balance between making demands on supervisees but also being responsive. And we need to think about how we can support supervisors in doing that. Tony was also very good at getting good lists together, which really helped us to think about some of the key elements. I won't go through this because of time, but that was some of the thinking we were doing around what is authoritative supervision. Linked to this, and I just wanted to finish with some of the other work we were thinking about in relation to the supervision of assessment practice. This came out from the NQSW work. It was written up in the NQSW Supervisors Manual, but for those of you that haven't had a chance to see that, you may not have seen one of Tony's later models, which was trying to think about how can we give supervisors tools that are going to help them to be authoritative, are going to help them to really explore those dynamics, particularly in relation to assessment work. We know there have been problems with assessments for all sorts of reasons, not just to do with supervision, but assessments have frequently come up in reviews and other pieces of work as needing attention. So we were thinking about, well, okay, what is a good assessment? And it's a lot of the things that Eileen was actually talking about earlier, and we put another list together in thinking about what a good assessment might be. And Tony then developed this to another model. You will, I'm sure, most of you be familiar with the Kolb supervision cycle, which Tony developed, has trained numerous people on, and has made a huge difference to the quality of supervision that people have been getting in many, many places. What he wanted to do was to develop that Kolb supervision cycle in a way that was going to really capture some of the things that we've just been talking about. Capture what do we know about some of the lessons from reviews. What do we know about issues in assessment? How are we going to really help people to look at some of the complex dynamics that go on within complex cases and across professional networks. And so this was developed into another very colourful model with, and you will notice arrows going in two ways. Often the Kolb model, the arrows go one way, but actually the arrows are going two ways here to show that it's how you respond in one area may well reflect back on another. And this is asking people to be very clear about the focus of assessment. It takes the reflection stage and splits it into two parts, really, reflecting on assumptions very early on in the whole process, because that will affect the way people gather information, the way they react to and work with the multidisciplinary network, and then exploring the dynamics and reflecting on the dynamics of the whole kind of situation at all the various levels, before then moving on to analyse, to think about the meaning of the information and formulate plans that can be explained. I thought it was actually quite important for those of you who may not have seen this to see one of the later models that Tony had put together. It can be, his work on this should be on the CWDC website. We've just had to redo the supervisor's manual for this year. I'm not sure if it's made its way back onto their website yet, but it should be on their website. And I think I can speak for the other trainers to say that people have found this extremely useful, along with other tools that we've been using, really to help them to unpick, particularly in relation to complex childcare cases, how they can really work more effectively together in supervision. And I'm going to skip through that, and I just want to finish. You haven't got this in your packs, because I'll put it on at the end, I'm afraid. I wanted to finish with a quote from the introduction to the trainer's manual that we wrote for the newly qualified social workers, because I thought it really was important to end with the words of Tony, but also I think this sums up some of the thinking. It would be hard to overstate the importance of good supervision at a time when there is such intense political and professional concern about the quality of children's services. It's in such a climate that the role of supervision in leading practice, which was very much what Tony was talking about, supervision in leading practice as well as managing performance is so critical. Good supervision and good outcomes for children and their families are inextricably bound together. Ensuring that all those responsible for the supervision of staff are properly trained and supported must therefore be one of the most urgent priorities within any children and young person service. And that's where we hope we can start today with some of the words of Tony, some of the really important things he was saying. Remember this comment about it being one of the most urgent priorities within any service, and to take today as a springboard for moving forward.